Welcome. Hi, I'm Mikki, and this is Mikkipedia, where I sit down and chat to doctors, professors, athletes, practitioners, and experts in their fields related to health, nutrition, fitness, and well-being. And I'm delighted that you're here. Hey everyone, Mikki here. You are listening to Mikkipedia, and today on the podcast, I am excited to bring to you my conversation that I had with Dr. Bill Campbell. So Dr. Campbell is one of the leading researchers in the physique world, and you guys know that I'm super interested and passionate about helping people improve their body composition, and a lot of Dr. Campbell's research has informed the practices that I use with my own clients and in my group programs. Dr. Campbell is an Associate Professor of Exercise Science and the Director of the Performance and Physique Enhancement Lab at the University of South Florida. He has a Ph.D. in Exercise, Nutrition and Preventative Health. He's authored 3 books on sports nutrition and over 150 scientific abstracts and manuscripts focusing on the topics of sports nutrition and exercise science. And he is the previous president of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. In today's episode, we talk all about his research into diet breaks, intermittent versus continuous dieting, the importance of protein for fat loss, particularly for women, in combination with resistance training, and much more. And I think male or female, you're going to get a lot from the conversation that Dr. Campbell and I have, and he shares a lot of his own sort of insights into what he sees in his lab and clinically and with the people that he deals with. Just before we kick on into today's interview, just to remind you that the best way to support this podcast is to please subscribe on your favourite platform, and where it's possible, leave a 5-star review. Share it with your mates, and in addition to that, if you felt like you needed more recipe or meal inspiration, head on over to my website, Williden.com, and sign up to my recipe portal for $12 a month. You get access to over 600 recipes, and they are updated very regularly. You get my weekly emails, you get one-on-one with me via a messaging system, you have access to our private Facebook page where we do lives, we do weekly forums, you get the whole shebang really, so I can help you in your nutrition journey, and that is for $12 a month. Alright team, please enjoy the conversation that I have with Dr. Bill Campbell. Dr. Bill Campbell, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me this morning. I really appreciate it. Can we kick off by getting you to chat about how you got into your research on exercise performance and enhancing physique?
Yeah, so I think my earlier life passion was bodybuilding. So I've always been interested in building muscle and losing fat and dietary supplements. And I played sports, so I was interested in sports nutrition. So I just knew if my dream job would have something to do with those areas, but I didn't know that until my late 20s. I was actually in a different career. I was, selling. I was in sales and marketing. And then I realized, I don't want to do this the rest of my life, but I do like working out. I like nutrition. I like dietary supplements, or at least studying them. So I made the decision in my late 20s to go back to school, not really thinking I would be a professor and a researcher, just knowing that I want to do something in that area. So I think I'm one of those very blessed people by God that is able to do what the exact thing that I'm interested in doing.
Yeah, so I heard you speak on another podcast, and it might have been with Lane Norton and Holly Baxter about your sort of initial sales job and then sort of getting into studying it and then kind of just furthering that aspect. And I think what I love about what you do, Bill, is that you're about enhancing physique, exercise performance, but it's not necessarily just at that elite athlete or physique competitor level. Like I feel like you almost do what we're all sort of looking for is you're doing research on people sort of just like us, which you don't often find in research.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I like to my ideal is that my research helps people optimize their physiques within a maintainable lifestyle. So people that
Yeah.
are at the elite level, they're not living a maintainable lifestyle. They're elite. They can structure 7 hours of their day around their food preparation, their training. Most people can't do that. So I'd like to find out the best practices, the best strategies to help normal people get the best bodies if they want it. So if somebody wants to have lower body fat and a little more muscle mass, what are the best things they can do to execute on that? And obviously, I learn from bodybuilders. I learn from those elite people because I think that those are the experts in fat loss. And then we just design studies around different lifestyle approaches that help people optimize their physique. So you're exactly right. I like to think I serve the serious fitness minded individual.
Yeah, and that'll be a lot of people that will be listening to a podcast like this. And I often think, Bill, and I don't know how you feel about it, but when I'm looking at research in fat loss, a lot of it is, if we look at the other end of the spectrum, it's on people who are like extremely overweight or would fit into that obese category. And it almost feels a little bit demotivating is not quite the right word, but you look at the outcome of a particular intervention, and these people have gone on a very controlled sort of intervention for 3, 6 or 9 months, or, quite a long period of time. And the average weight loss on that might be, 1.3 kilos, which might be a significant difference in between both groups, but actually that's not really that meaningful for that person or individual in the trial who has a serious amount of weight to lose. I find that really interesting. I'm not sure how you feel about that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, one thing that I teach my students a lot is a lot of these studies, they report weight loss. And and I know that's not really the focus because, and I'll give it a perfect example. There are a lot of studies when they compare exercise versus diet for weight loss. They find that either there's no difference or that diet's always better. Yeah. In fact, they'll often say exercise didn't cause hardly any weight loss. Well, the reason that's the case is exercise causes a lot of fat loss, but in non-trained people, they actually gain muscle mass even from aerobic exercise. So when you only look at weight loss, you don't get a true picture of physique changes. So there's one problem with that. And then the other one, just to go off on a tangent for a second. These studies that compare exercise versus diet, they'll put somebody in a 500 calorie diet caloric deficit, and they'll exercise, and then the other group exercises at maybe like 200 calories per day. So it's not even an equalized energy deficit. So I say all of this to say, yes, when weight loss is minimal, make sure that we're always looking past the weight loss and looking at the body composition, or because it's possible they actually lost muscle or gained muscle mass and lost more fat mass than what the scale would suggest. And then the other part of this is the people that I research and the people that I think I serve, if they are losing 1 to 2 kgs of body weight, if they're not, usually I don't study obese individuals anymore. That's still a big difference in their physiques when they're already relatively lean to start with.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I saw you had a post on your social media feed on Instagram, and I absolutely love your feed. It's so informative, and you're really quite practical with it, and people, you can learn so much. You had a post in and around the constrained model of energy expenditure. And I know, and you were very respectful, obviously, of the researchers in the field, like in terms of their findings that, in fact, exercise might not be so helpful for weight loss. But is this talking to your point that you've just mentioned, that if it's solely weight you're looking at, then yes, on balance, there might not be that different, but you have to look beyond. Was that the sort of point of your post?
Yeah, so a lot of my newfound knowledge of the importance of, just weight loss was based on my work, or not my work, but my reading of the constrained energy theory. And I realized, wow, that is really overplayed. Like the message is often from that research. And again, I'm not saying it's the researchers, it's oftentimes the media interpreting their research, but they basically give the message: exercise is worthless for fat loss. Like, don't do it. And it's couldn't be further from the truth. It's exercise is an amazing fat loss strategy.
Mm.
In fact, if you look at the handful of studies, and I mean less than 5, when they directly compare exercise versus diet, and they have an equal caloric deficit or energy deficit, meaning that we're going to reduce calories by 500 from food, or we're going to increase exercise energy expenditure by 500 calories. Exercise is better. It causes more fat loss than diets. And you also get all of the added benefits of the health, the insulin sensitivity improvements, the joint integrity, the better depression or mental health outcomes. So exercise is better when you're comparing apples to apples. But that doesn't mean that people are as motivated to exercise. So I would much rather, I don't like aerobic exercise, even though I know the data. Yeah. I prefer just to reduce my calories a little bit. But ultimately, both work, and I don't like the messaging when I don't believe it's true.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely agree with you, the way that the media, I mean, they do that clickbait headline, but in addition to that, there are actually many, I look at some of the programs that are out there to potentially help people reach their sort of physique, and they may well be speaking to an audience who does have an excessive amount of fat to lose, and a lot of the messaging is it's hard work to exercise. You don't want to be doing that, and entirely, and you don't need to. And that's a whole other issue, which we won't really get into here, but I find it sort of interesting. Bill, you've done so much research in the space of nonlinear dieting, actually, and I really like how your sort of studies explore the notion that, you can have this consistent drop in calories to achieve fat loss, or you can, for want of a better term, calorie cycle or change it up. What sparked your interest in looking at these different approaches to dieting that isn't just a straight continuous calorie deficit?
Yeah, I would say 2 things. And by the way, you mentioned about the exercise being hard work, and we won't talk about that. But if there's time at the end, I'm happy to talk about that, because my opinion is not popular, and but I feel like the messaging is all one side right now, and I think people do need to hear the truth about how the work and it's not okay to be overweight for health, despite what we're hearing. But again, we can address that later. My interest in nonlinear dieting was piqued with the Matador study. So there was a study published, maybe 2016, 2018, I don't remember, but it reported in obese males when they dieted for 2 weeks, and then they took a 2-week break, and they went back to their maintenance calories, and they just repeated that cycle 8 times. So 16 weeks of dieting and 16 weeks of taking breaks. They lost significantly more body fat. They were able to maintain their metabolic rates better. And I saw that, and I was like, wow, that is amazing results. And it fit kind of my paradigm for how dieting should be. It doesn't have to be a race. Like, take your time, and what better way to take a time than keep taking breaks. So I thought, there's something to this. Now, since that time, my lab has done 2 studies. One of them has been published. The other one is under review now. And I think that the Matador study, which initially caught my interest, was kind of an outlier study.
Okay.
It hasn't been replicated, meaning that all of the other studies done since then that I'm aware of didn't have nearly the positive findings that study had. So the other reason why it piques my interest is based on the study that we did. Again, my philosophy is helping people optimize their physiques within a maintainable lifestyle. It just so happens that most people in their normal lifestyles, they eat more calories on the weekends than they do during the week. So I think it makes sense. Let's design a diet that works with that approach, that works with your lifestyle. So we did a nonlinear dieting study where the subjects were able to increase their calories on the weekends. And that one, not as good as the Matador study, but we did have some positive findings with that. So there was my interest, the Matador study, and just my recognition in my own life and in the research that people, they eat more food on the weekends, and that's a nonlinear approach to dieting if you can make that into a diet strategy.
What was it about the Matador study that you think made it an outlier? Could you look at it again, sort of in reflection with all of the other research, and go, okay, that's why they found such a positive effect, or just it was what it was?
Yeah, so I think the reason that the group that increased that had the better outcomes, I think they simply adhered to the diet better. When they were dieting at the level that the researchers wanted. I think it was like a 33% caloric restriction. My thought is that the other group was not as, their adherence wasn't as good.
Yeah.
So that would tell me it's not physiological, it's just more psychological, but that's still a powerful finding. It doesn't matter what the physiology is. If the endpoint is greater fat loss, and it was that they could adhere to it better, that we should learn from that. And I will say this: a lot of people now, because again, the research, and some of my own that's not published yet, is coming out saying that diet breaks or these refeeds aren't any better than the traditional continuous dieting approach. So people are saying, yep, they're worthless. There's no help. I think that's a very naive interpretation. They never cause harm taking these nonlinear approaches. They're never causing greater fat loss. Yes, they're taking more time because you're having to do the breaks, but it never hurts. And in both of the most recent studies, the one that was published and ours that will come out, that we both found that it improved one of the 3-factor eating inventories, which was they call it disinhibition, which is the propensity to overeat. So in both of these most recent studies, if you take breaks, whether it's every other week or every third week, it prevents the drive to overeat that you do have when you never take a break. That's all. I mean, what causes diets to fail? You lose the battle to hunger.
Yeah.
And it looks like these diet breaks are providing some defenses against this drive to eat. So I think that's, even though they might not provide a direct benefit, even though some research says they do, they never cause harm. And I think they institute better long-term dietary habits.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Bill. Can you talk us through the study that has been published and sort of the level of restriction, I suppose, and also what it even is like a refeed? Like, what does that even mean? Is it people hear that and think, oh, cheat day or, binge fest, but I appreciate that it's a little bit different from that. So can you sort of detail that out?
Yeah, so you and I are using the term nonlinear dieting. I like to say that that's the umbrella term. So there's a lot of things that fit underneath nonlinear dieting. One of the terms, the two terms we're going to use is diet breaks and diet refeeds. Diet breaks are exactly what they sound like. You're in a diet, but you're taking a break from that diet. And a diet break is typically defined as a 1 week or more of a break from the diet. Typically, they're 1 week, maybe 2 weeks. In some cases, they're even a little longer than 2 weeks. A diet refeed is similar, but it's more on a day scale than it is a week scale. So in our study, our diet refeed was 2 days per week on the weekends. So they didn't take a week off from dieting, but during the week, they dieted for 5 days, and then they took a break or a refeed for 2 days. And in all of these cases, we have to make sure that we're aware that when they go back to their when they're on a break, they are not just eating whatever they want. They are going back to maintenance calories. So they're not really overeating, but it sure feels like it to them because they've been dieting and now they get to increase their calories, but not above what they were doing before the diet started. So that's a very important definition of these, or an application of these. It's not really a cheat day where you're eating just tons of calories.
And I feel like this approach has so many benefits for people in that who feel like they're either on a diet or off a diet. And they're never sort of in that middle ground of practicing what it's like to eat in a way that maintains your body weight, because even if they're maintaining their body weight when they're off a diet, it's often because they are heavily restricting on some days and then overeating on others. So they're sort of, I suppose, on balance, they're maintaining their weight rather than on those maintenance calories. With regards to the energy restriction of the people with the refeeds, so throughout the week, their restriction was greater than those who were just continuously dieting to be sort of on balance, is that?
Yes, yeah. So in our study, we did an average weekly deficit of 25%. So if a subject was eating 2,000 calories in their normal life, over the course of a week, we reduced it by 25%. So that subject would be eating 1,500 calories. But the only way that works when you have, that's an average of 7 days. So what we had to do in our refeed group, because they were spending 2 days at 100% of their calories, what that meant was Monday through Friday, they had to reduce their calories more than 25%. We had to reduce it to 35% 5 days per week. And then when you factored in the 2 days of maintenance eating, that was an overall average on the week of a 25% deficit.
And what were they given any instruction as to how to meet their maintenance calorie needs on those refeed weekends?
Yes, we instituted a few things. The first thing was 25% less calories overall in the week.
Yeah.
But when they did their refeeds, so that the weekends, they had to have at least 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And that was true of all the subjects, regardless of what group they were in. So some of it had to come from protein. And then we told them, okay, you've been dieting at 35% lower calories. Keep the protein the same on the weekend, but increase your calories back to maintenance levels, but do that all from carbohydrates. So we said emphasize carbohydrates. And the reason we did that was there was some research prior that reported that leptin levels were improved in dieting females who increased carbs for a 3-day period. So we did 2 days, and that was the rationale. Now, whether or not that actually matters, I don't know. But if at least in that prior study, it did improve acute leptin levels. And just for anybody that's wondering what are leptin levels, if your leptin levels are high, that tends to be associated with non-hunger. If leptin levels are low, that's highly associated with a strong drive to eat. So if you can diet and keep your leptin levels high, that probably is a good sign of longer-term adherence, and probably not going to, you're going to be less likely to quit the diet or cheat.
And whilst you didn't measure leptin, but of course you had that inventory that talked about hunger, which could almost be a proxy for, I mean, you'd never probably say that in science, but, as you're sort of talking about it to people, it's quite a good indication that potentially you found, that could have also been going on with that sort of carbohydrate increase.
Yes, yeah. Now, we did measure leptin in a subset of subjects, but it was just at the beginning of the study and end of the study. So we didn't really measure leptin before the diet break or the refeed and then after, which would have been probably better. So we just did some subjects before and at the end. And what happens with leptin generally, as you lose fat, your leptin levels go down. A lot of leptin is produced by fat cells. So if you have less fat cells or smaller fat cells, you produce less leptin. So that's what we found.
Yeah. Bill, can you tell us anything about your study? Is it a follow-on study, the one that is in peer review for publication now? Are you able to share any details on that?
Yeah, I can share a lot about that. We presented that data last year at a conference. It's just not published yet. That was not a refeed study, so that was more of a traditional diet break study. And what we did was we took resistance-trained females and put them on a 6-week diet. So we wanted that we reduced their calories by 25% for a 6-week period. And again, these subjects were resistance-trained females. Just as a side note, my lab does a lot of female-specific research in this world of physique enhancement. And one group dieted for 6 weeks straight. The other group, the diet break group, they dieted for 2 weeks, and then they took a week break, and then they dieted for 2 weeks again, and then they took another 1 week break, and then they dieted for a final 2 weeks. So both groups had a 6-week diet phase or diet period. It's just that one of them, their total intervention was 8 weeks because we interspersed 2 diet breaks.
Yeah.
And the major conclusions were it didn't offer any advantage. It didn't cause any harm. They didn't gain any fat, but it didn't offer any advantage, except for this propensity to overeat. Their propensity to overeat was lower in the group that took these diet breaks. So that, again, that's a pretty consistent finding in the recent research of diet breaks. And again, I think that's pretty powerful. And the other thing that I love about what we did was we gave our subjects scales. So during that they took home with them, we supervised their workouts. But during their diet breaks, they weighed themselves every day because now we can have information on, well, if you're going to take a diet break, will you gain weight? Will you lose weight? What happens? And we were able to look at, to get data on actual people doing this. The average was a gain of, I think it was a little less than a kilogram. Some did lose body weight. Some gained a little body weight. Overall, it was a little bit of a gain, but that didn't make any difference by the end of the study, like meaning that they lost it again when they were dieting. And that was just weight. We didn't really, we didn't have validated measures of body composition. So the reason I think that's important, it just tells people you can expect some weight gain during a diet break period. But if you just stay on the diet after this, that will not have any impact on your overall fat loss outcomes.
Yeah. And Bill, do you have a sense of what might be preferable for people out there if we're thinking about whether or not a 2 to 3 day refeed is going to be a better approach than, say, an entire week? Like, what's your gut? Like, do you have a gut feeling about that? If there was no difference in the sort of clinical, your trials? Yeah.
Well, one thing, our diet refeed, where it was the 2-day approach, they didn't lose more fat, but they were able to maintain their muscle mass or their fat-free mass, specifically their dry fat-free mass when we account for body water, significantly better than the group that didn't do the refeed. And it's not surprising, if you maintain your muscle mass, you also have a better outcome on your metabolic rate. Yeah. So their metabolic rates were also maintained better than the other group, at least when compared to baseline levels. So knowing that was the only study in resistance-trained people, and we had a clear benefit, and when you compare that to the diet break studies where there wasn't benefits, I think I would, and again, my lab's done 2 studies now. I think the 2-day approach may be better, but that's based on just 2 studies, 1 in each one.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think the best approach is, what would a client or the individual, what excites them more? Would they rather take an entire week break, or are they really motivated to diet, and just taking a 2-day break every weekend is better? I would always default to what's going to help, what the client preference is. So in my case, I love weekend. Like I want to increase my calories on the weekend. I really do not want to diet on the weekend. So I'm always going to default to a refeed approach where I'm going to take 2 days instead of an entire week of increasing my calories.
And I guess as well, like if I think about holiday seasons and people's social lives and things like that, it just provides them with, as long as we can manage expectations around how long it might take to lose the weight that they want to lose, then I think there's that people who feel like it's either on or off can recognize that actually a diet break is actually just part of the process. And if you've got Thanksgiving, if you've got Christmas, if you've got Easter, and you're going to be spending time out of your normal environment, then it's not the end of your diet world to take a break from it. And it means that it almost would encourage a little bit more dietary restraint, probably, knowing that if you just sort of adhere to a higher than what your sort of diet calories are at, you can still get to enjoy a lot of things, but not feel like you've lost control maybe.
I think that's exactly right. Now, I am not a exercise psychologist, but what you said, I think, is very important. If you're going into the holiday and it's part of your plan to take a break, now you're following your plan. Like you're on task rather than, and I think this is really what hurts a lot of people. They think, well, I'm just not going to eat as much during the holiday, and I'm going to diet. And they don't do that. Now they failed. Now they have that guilt, that anxiety. And if they just change their approach, change their paradigm, I'm not going to diet, but that's part of my plan.
Yeah.
And I'm even fine with, like, for myself, let's say Thanksgiving. You guys don't celebrate Thanksgiving. Okay.
No.
But Christmas, Easter.
Yeah.
So let's say Christmas. If my normal maintenance calories are 3,000 to make it easy, maybe for 3 days, the day before Christmas, and the day after, I'm going to plan to go to 4,000 calories. I'm going to eat 33% more. Now, is that a great decision? It's not a great decision if I'm trying to lose fat, but I can make up for that or make adjustments before and after. And I've just given myself freedom to do that. I think that's so much different than saying I'm going to do something, then not doing it and having the guilt. And then ultimately, I think what a lot of people do is they just quit. They're like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
No, you can. Let's just plan for the times where it's going to be more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way that you sort of described how you might approach a holiday season is that recognition that I think a lot of people treat each day in their diet as almost this isolated sort of moment in time. So you're on a 2,200 calorie diet and you've got to hit that every single day. Whereas if you instead sort of step back and go, right, well, across the course of a week, I've got 2,200 times 7. That's not actually like, what's that? 15,400, I don't know, whatever it was, 15,400. And then if you have those additional kind of higher calorie days, then you can sort of shave some of those calories off on the other days, and then it all sort of washes out in the end.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I agree. That's how the body works. Now, it does come down to what you do on a day-to-day basis. I don't want to minimize that, but a plan that allows you to feel good about the plan, that again works with you on weekends, on holidays, that gives you freedom. I think it's the way to go. It's working with your lifestyle rather than against it.
Yeah. Bill, I get a lot of pushback from people in my sort of area, from the anti-diet culture or movement, saying that tracking's obsessive, that thinking about macros is obsessive, that it's too structured for some people and then it's sort of destined to fail them. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's I would agree. It's an obsessive practice. But some people are inclined to obsessive practices, and that doesn't mean it's unhealthy. Now, again, I want to be careful. I'm not a psychologist, so I don't speak from the literature in that area. But to make blanket statements and say it's obsessive and doomed to fail, well, that are making a lot of assumptions with that. And I would say if somebody can have success with something other than tracking macros, great. That's what they should do. I would still suggest every human being that has the privilege of counting macros, meaning that they're not, in poverty, just worried meal to meal. So that we're not talking about that unfortunate situation. There is a huge, immense educational benefit to tracking your macros for 6 months of your life. Maybe you never do it again, but the education that you learn about food, and if you pay attention to how your body responds to that food, like what happens when you eat higher protein, what happens when you eat less, you understand what food is. You understand what foods are. You know that butter is fat. You know that broccoli is carbs. You know that chicken breast is protein. That's an education that you now have the rest of your life. So I'm an educator, a professor. I'm always going to advocate you should learn invest in your body, invest in your education. There is no better education in your dieting, food intake life than tracking your macros for several months. If it's not working for you or it's too obsessive, great, don't do it anymore. I not like I make money from macro tracking. It makes no difference to me. But on the same conversation, I need it. If I don't track, I gain weight, and when I gain weight, I knowingly and now less healthy.
Yeah.
COVID, I'm more susceptible to COVID the more body fat I carry on my, or at least for the adverse effects of COVID.
Yeah.
So to me, macro tracking helps keep me in a more fit state than not tracking. Now, that's not true for everybody, but there are a lot of people like me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate. And, I found it super helpful, even as a nutritionist of, a couple of decades, to track, to ensure that I'm getting what I need to help support my training. So it's sort of that flip side. It's not the tracking from a restrictive perspective. It's like, am I actually meeting my protein? Am I, practicing what I preach? That kind of thing. And also, if you do learn that you're obsessive about it, well, that's still an education, isn't it? Like, hey, I tried it and it really wasn't for me. So now I have to try and figure out what might work best. So you're right. It's totally all learning.
Yeah. So, and think about this, the person who does that, and as an example, if they walk by a bowl of candy or chocolate or something that's high calorie, they may just, take 2 or 3 handfuls and go on their way. But when you're tracking that, you really appreciate, wow, that was 400 calories. Now that doesn't mean that you should never do that. But without tracking, I don't think people appreciate the caloric density of processed candy, chocolate types of foods. And I love all of that stuff. I just feel like I have more freedom and can enjoy it more when I'm tracking.
No, I agree. And it's like the peanut butter jar. Don't get me started there, because that 15 grams of peanut butter is nowhere near as much as you think it is, as what you thought it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
Peanut butter's great. Like I'm like you. I don't know, like 2 months ago, or maybe it was this past year, did a serving and I weighed it. I was like 3 times more than what I thought. I'm a professional in this space. I should know. I track my macros. I hadn't eaten peanut butter in a long time before that, but yeah, it got me, and I'm somebody that technically should know.
No, I'm exactly the same. And what I've found really interesting is as I've sort of evolved over the years in my thinking around nutrition, I've sort of gone from that, I did the nutrition science degree, then I sort of moved into that more sort of like paleo sphere, in 2010, and then suddenly like nut butter was back on the menu because it wasn't all about low fat. And then, of course, a lot of people also jumped on that bandwagon and still do in the keto and stuff, which I think can be super helpful for so many people. And if it's your preferred dietary approach and it works for you, that's amazing. But those carrots that people used to use as a snack suddenly were sort of switched out for like nuts and peanut butter sachets and cheese and things which are highly calorically dense, and preventing someone from sort of tapping into their own fat stores, so it's a common sort of it often catches people out, I think.
Yeah, I think it's probably very hard to overeat on carrots.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Exactly. Hey,
nuts and cheese? Yeah.
Oh, so much so. Now, I saw there was a recent study published by a student of yours, Lauren Conlon, looking at flexible dieting versus rigid meal plans. Are you able to sort of briefly describe what some of the findings were in and around that particular piece of research?
Yes, yeah. So, you mentioned my student. She coordinated that study. She basically was the mastermind behind that entire study. So we just published that. I think that was earlier this year. So it's a very recent publication. We actually did the study a couple years ago. That was the first study that I'm aware of that has compared flexible dieting versus a more rigid approach. So a lot of people, embrace flexible dieting, and we think that it's just as good or maybe better, but there was never research, at least not in resistance trained people, so fit people. So that's what we did. So we had two groups in this study. We told them to everybody reduce your calories by 25% for a 10-week period. And as they do that, we also made, I think it was they had to eat 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So we had protein high. And then they were, of course, resistance training. And we told them that don't add or subtract any cardio. And what we found, the main finding was that after 10 weeks, well, let me just explain the differences between the two groups. So a flexible dieting group, we said, here's your macros. It's 25% lower. Hit your protein goal. And then the rest get approximately equal from fat and carbs, not really caring if they did or didn't. We just wanted to make sure that they were at their 25% fewer than maintenance calories and that they were hitting their protein. And the other group, we said, we're not giving you macros, we're giving you just calories. And here's some example diets that will fit these calories. And there were just a few exchanges that they could use. Not very many though. So like maybe we had them eat chicken breast and broccoli and orange juice as a meal. And instead of chicken breast, maybe they wanted salmon or lean beef. Instead of broccoli, maybe cauliflower or asparagus. So they had very limited choices. And we called that the rigid diet. And the flexible diet, again, they could eat whatever they want as long as they hit those specific macros. And after the 10-week diet phase, there was no differences in fat loss. They both lost the same amount of fat, both maintained the same amount of muscle, and metabolic rate was the same. The only thing different between the two groups was in the 10 weeks after the diets, what we called the post-diet phase. The subjects in the flexible dieting group gained significantly more lean body mass in the 10 weeks after the diet. Why? I don't know. We don't know. We are hesitant to say, oh, flexible dieting is more anabolic. I don't think that would be reaching. But we did observe that, so that's what we reported. But I think the main take home is if you prefer somebody giving you a meal plan and that helps you adhere better, that's great. There's nothing better than that. Or if you prefer, don't tell me what to eat, I want to choose my foods, that's great. There's nothing better than that. As long as you control calories, and both approaches are effective for fat loss. That's the main finding of that study.
And it seems when I was reading the study and I've heard, I think Lauren talk about it on her social media account and stuff, it seems it's maybe a personality thing, as you've just said. Some people actually like that decision being taken away. Like they don't need that decision burden of what to eat. They're really good at following structure, a plan, and they'll do it if they think it's going to sort of lead to the outcome that they're looking for. Yet other people, and again, it comes back to that whole structure. Some people just actually would prefer to make those decisions themselves and have that sort of flexibility, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And again, there's nothing, one was not better than the other. So whatever works for you, you can feel good that it is the best approach for you as an individual.
Yeah. Bill, I'm a big advocate for protein. And what I notice in my practice is that women often really struggle to get the protein that they need. And for whatever reason, they just find it extremely difficult. Now, I understand you've done you've actually looked at a research looking at sort of the impact of high versus low protein on fat loss in females. Are you able to sort of chat a little bit about your research there and what you've found?
Yeah, so that was I think that was probably my best work as a researcher in the sense of driving, everything's male dominant. So that was a study that we looked at resistance trained females in protein intake. So what we did was we took resistance trained females and randomized them to one of two groups, a high protein group and a low protein group. And at the end of this 8-week period, the high protein group gained a significant amount of lean body mass, significantly more than the low protein group. They also lost body fat, significant amount compared to baseline. And the funny thing was, Well, the difference between the two groups was the high protein group was eating 2.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body mass per day. That's a lot of protein. We gave them protein supplements to help with that. And then the low protein group was eating only 0.9 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So a big difference. It could be that you don't need 2.5. It maybe 1.8 is enough. We didn't look at a middle level. But the amazing thing was, to me, the most striking feature of that study was the high protein group lost body fat, but they increased their calories. So they increased their calories by almost 300 calories per day, but it was all in the form of protein.
Yeah.
So there's something about increasing calories from protein alone that was responsible for a reduction in fat mass. And that's not the only study to show that. There are a few other examples with similar findings.
Yeah.
So don't think of high protein just as building muscle. I think it also has impacts on fat loss as well.
Yeah. And can you sort of theorize what's going on there? Is it the thermogenic aspect?
Yeah, that has to be part of it. It's the only thing that makes sense. But if you talk about the thermic effect of protein, thermic effect would say if you eat 100 calories of protein, you burn 25 calories just digesting and absorbing it. So that's still 75 calories of energy that, that's not like you're losing energy by eating protein. Other than the thermic effect, I don't have obviously a lot of that, some of those other proteins or amino acids are being directed towards muscle protein synthesis. That takes energy as well. But I don't have a good mechanism to be able to explain why that's the case, because it doesn't make sense. If you increase calories, as we are all taught in grad school, you should gain body fat, but it's not what happened in our study and a few others where they increase protein in resistance trained people. They either lose fat or they don't gain fat, even when calories are going up.
Yeah, super interesting. And Bill, when you're talking about resistance trained females, what constitutes a resistance trained female? Just for the people out there who are just like, would I fit into that category? So what's your sort of criteria?
Well, in that study we just talked about, the protein study, that was 6 months of prior resistance training experience. The subjects also had to be able to deadlift 1.25 times their body weight to get into the study.
Okay. And
there were some subjects or some interested subjects that weren't strong enough or that failed that. So that's not a perfect criteria, because maybe they've been training upper body for 5 years and they just never did deadlifts. But at least it was some criteria to demonstrate, hey, do you have a base level of whole body strength or the back and hams, glutes for that? Let me think. The other study, the diet break study, I think that was also 1 year of resistance training experience. And that was subjective. Like we didn't have a test in that study that they had to meet to get in. But typically when you see the word resistance trained, 6 months or more often 1 or 2 years of prior resistance training experience.
Yeah, awesome. And I also love that the higher protein focus that you take, like, because even in that sort of low protein group, it's 0.9 grams per kg body weight, which is sort of in line with what people understand the recommended protein intake levels to sort of be. Not sort of recognizing that sort of this minimum threshold for survival, not necessarily what you might need in order to optimize body composition and regulate hunger and all the rest of it. Do you I suppose with the protein supplements, did the people in that study, do you recall any sort of qualitative findings in and around how easy it was for them to consume that amount?
I don't remember. We actually told them they had to ingest 2.2 grams.
Yeah.
And they actually surpassed that. They actually ingested 2.5. I know what helped was the fact that we gave them protein supplements immediately after their workouts where we watched them drink it.
Yeah.
And we gave them to take home that they could, then put into because they actually track their macros. All the subjects in that study tracked their macros. for whatever reason, I don't recall subjects complaining about that high protein. But you and I know that a lot of people, males and females, that's a lot of protein for people to try to hit per day. I personally get that much, about 2.2 grams per kg, but that's with the help of protein supplements and usually one protein bar per day for myself. It would be challenging if I had to do that on Whole Foods for myself.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. I think I was sort of put onto protein powders and protein bars through sort of Bill Phillips' Body for Life, if you recall that program way back in the 90s or whatever, and then just sort of have always quite liked them. So that's, and I know not everyone loves the taste of protein powder, but I've always been like, oh no, this is great. Yeah. I love it.
You just dated yourself. I'm surprised that you were old enough to remember Bill Phillips.
I know. No, I have just dated myself actually. But there you go. It must be my dietary approach and my, healthy love of resistance training and cardio and all the rest of it, the lifestyle stuff, Bill. Yeah.
Hey, that whole Bill Phillips, that really lit my fire. I used to get the magazine Muscle Media 2000. That was a little bit right before his Body for Life. So I was even in the front end of that craze.
Yeah.
Before he went more mainstream, I guess, with the Body for Life aspect.
Yeah. And what I loved about it, actually, it was so simple. You just had a unit of carbs, a unit of protein, a little bit of fat. You could use his supplements or get it from Whole Food. I remember him sort of saying that in his book. And then this, and not a particularly crazy exercise regime to sort of go with it. And those principles, maybe you wouldn't necessarily eat as often as what he would have suggested back then, but the principles haven't really changed over the years with regards to what is actually effective for fat loss. I mean, you can spin it in different ways to make it sound sort of new and exciting, but actually those foundations haven't appeared to have changed much.
Yes. Yep. I agree.
Yeah. Bill, have you done any research in the reverse dieting space, or do you have any thoughts around that? And I haven't actually seen any research that you've done, and I may have missed like a few studies or whatnot, but you're so well versed in this whole physique space. I imagine you have some opinions or thoughts.
We attempted to do a case series studies and we published that work. James Longstrom was my graduate student at the time, and he was the coordinator of that and really drove the design. And our attempt, and I'm going to start with an attempt because this is not how it ended up. Our attempt was we had 8 bodybuilders, males and females, that we tracked after their shows. 4 of them were going to do a reverse diet where they were slowly going to increase their calories. And that's what you asked, right? Reverse dieting? Is that what
yeah.
They were going to slowly increase their calories for 8 weeks, 10 weeks after their show. The other 4 were going to do a recovery diet, which was they weren't going to slowly increase their calories. They were going to have a larger increase in calories right after the show and be comfortable with gaining more body fat sooner. And what we were hoping, if I can just show, we were hoping that one group would go up like this and the other group was going to do this. But what we found was this, like nobody really did what they said and they kind of just overlapped. So we couldn't really differentiate the 2 approaches of a true reverse diet versus a recovery diet. And I think it's going to be very hard to do research in that area because I think if a reverse diet is going to work, if that's going to be effective, I think you have to start from a pretty low body fat level or a pretty long caloric deficit. And then if you slowly go back, in theory, you slowly increase calories, you do not gain fat, even though you're increasing calories. And I've seen that anecdotally. I don't think I've seen it in the research literature. And I think it's going to be hard to do it in the research literature other than a case study. So my thought is, I don't know, I'll go back 5 years or longer. Lane Norton, who's a colleague of mine, he was telling me about reverse dieting. And I was like, I don't think that can't happen. Like if you're going to increase calories, you're going to gain fat. he's like, no, Bill, I've worked with multiple clients. And then I worked with a client. And of course, I'm a researcher. So I was like, hey, let's try this. And it happened in front of my eyes. The client was my wife, which we were able to control every aspect. She got very lean. And then we slowly, I have all her data still. And I measured her body composition. Mm-hmm. She got to where she was eating a lot of food and she did not gain fat. So my thought is there's something to reverse dieting. I can't explain a mechanism. I can't even point to a study, but I can point to my wife or an N size of 1 where it was very, very eye-opening to me as a researcher.
Yeah. Have you tried it yourself, Bill?
Yeah, I did. Maybe 2 years ago, I got lean for me. I maybe got down to about 12% body fat for me. And I slowly increased, a very similar approach to my wife, but I didn't have the same outcome as my wife. I got to where I was gaining fat as I kept increasing. So I didn't notice, what I remember my wife was saying, I can't eat all this food. And she was still lean. I got to the point where I can still eat all this food and I'm gaining fat. So it was not the same approach. So it's definitely not a reproducible, or it's probably one of those individualistic outcomes.
Yeah, I see a lot about it in social media, in those case studies, and I follow a lot of Lane and Holly Baxter's work and what they've sort of described and also have worked with a few clients as well. And we've done exactly what you described with your wife, that slowly, gradually increasing calories. And I think the thing that I understand from reverse dieting is sometimes out in social media, it is sold almost as a fat loss approach. Eat more, lose fat, because a lot of what you see is people like your wife who managed to stay lean throughout. Whereas I know that's not necessarily always the case. But also it's almost, for some people, it would almost be you're continuing that diet because it's such a slow increase in calories that you still have to be a little bit restrained, potentially. And you have to sort of manage expectations about how long that process might take, potentially.
Yeah, it's a very disciplined, especially if you've been dieting for a long time and now you're going to continue to just slowly go back. It's funny you said, though, it's might not happen to everybody. I literally just communicated with somebody who's working with a coach. They have her increasing calories slowly, and she's gained like 15 pounds, and she thinks it's mostly fat. And they keep saying, "Hey, this is gonna help your metabolism." And I don't like to tell people who are working with coaches anything different, because they're not paying me, and two, I respect a coach-client relationship. But I felt bad. It's like, maybe what makes you think your metabolism is even damaged or slow? Like, have you had it measured? They said no. I'm like, well, I don't know if this reverse is working for you then, if you're gaining all this body fat.
Yeah.
I felt bad. It happened to be a female. So there's that. So there's one of those reverse diets that is not going well.
Yeah. And, I think about other people that I have worked with, and they just actually think they're under eating a lot of the time, and they are, but they're doing that sort of under eating blowout, and then, rinse and repeat. And in fact, they're not under eating, but if they just lifted their calories daily, they wouldn't have the blowout. They'd probably end up enjoying their food more and actually eating more. And it would feel like they were eating more, but actually the caloric intake would probably not be too different either.
Yeah, I think, it's amazing. Again, if you're tracking your macros, you see those trends.
Yeah. Now, Bill, just to finish off, I sort of mentioned at the start of the call, we won't go into that hard work about exercise and the thoughts around that. And you were like, actually, I've got some thoughts around how the work required to lose body weight that requires sort of exercise. Do you want to expand on that, if you can even remember that part of our conversation?
Yeah, I just have a recurring thought. The message, at least some of the stuff I see with the health at every size, I mean, that's not evidence-based. If you're overweight, you're not as healthy as you are when you're not carrying excess body fat.
Yeah.
Now, that is not to make, to think less of any individual who happens to be overweight. I've been overweight. I know what that feels like. I come from an overweight family. But to tell people that that's fine, don't worry about it, that's not doing anybody any favors. I think what's doing a favor is to say, if you want to optimize your health, you need to be at a given BMI or body weight. And here are the best approaches to do that. And some of those approaches are not, it's never easy. Losing body fat is not easy. So I'd like to think, as I'm raising children, don't ever get to where you are overweight, especially when you're young, to now where you're going to have to fight this. Because there's some evidence to suggest, childhood obesity, it's something that you're going to struggle with the rest of your life. So if you can prevent it from starting, you have such a better outcome. So I just get worried with all of the messaging about the negatives of, diet culture, weight loss culture. And there is a lot of unethical people in the space, but that doesn't mean that you throw out the entire message. I think we're doing a lot of harm because people are now thinking, oh, I'm overweight and that's fine because X, Y, or Z person says it's fine. And again, I think my research it's for people who want to lose body fat or who want to walk around more fit and have a lower body fat percentage. Not telling anybody that they should, but if you want to, the research that I do is going to be the most scientifically based approaches to get there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Bill, what have you got coming up in the next couple of years as sort of building on what you're doing? Any research that we should look out for? Anything that's really exciting you at the moment that we may not have sort of touched on?
Yeah, I'm currently we're doing another high versus low protein diet study in females. This time we're looking at non-resistance trained females. So females that didn't currently lift weights at all. And we're actually doing two things there. We're asking, is higher protein better if you're just starting training? And it may not be when you're starting. The other thing is, which you'll appreciate, we have one group tracking everything and we have one group not tracking anything. We just have them intuitively increasing their protein. So if the data says that it is important to have higher protein, the next question is, okay, do you need to track it or can you just try to purposefully eat more? So we're going to answer that question. The other thing is I plan on starting a research review in the next year, and that will be highly focused on building muscle and losing body fat, exactly, around my research. So it's going to be very niche-y and focused only on that. I'm not going to branch out into a lot of other areas, but I'm very excited about that because that's what I love. I love body composition, dieting, exercise to maintain low body fat levels and to have as much muscle as possible.
That's awesome, Bill. I love that geeks like you and my mate Eric and other people are doing these research reviews to help practitioners like me help our clients, and yeah, it is quite niche. Well, you say niche. That's a real US thing.
I think we use both. Niche.
Oh, do you?
Niche. Yeah. What do you guys say? We
say niche. That's a very niche area, and I've just heard niche so often from the people that I follow over in the States. I'm like, oh, that must be a thing. So I'm certainly I'll certainly keep an eye out for the research review. Like it's just great professional development, really. Like it's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. And to be fair, I actually reached out to Eric and the Mass people because I have a lot of respect for them and they've been nothing but supportive. They were like, they've even offered me free advice. So I have I have a ton of respect for them. And what I'm going to put out is not going to be anything close to what Mass does. That is, they are, that's an amazing product that they do.
Yeah, no, I subscribe to it, even though I'm not at all in that space, but just because I'm a geek about the whole area, I just like to sort of know what's going on and at least, or pretend to understand a lot of it. Bill, thank you. You've been so generous with your time this morning. Can you tell us, for the listeners who might not be aware of you, where they may be able to find out more?
Yeah, the only place I really am active is on Instagram, and that my Instagram handle is Bill Campbell Ph.D. And I just try to educate. I do a lot of multiple choice, true, false questions just because I'm a professor and I write exam questions. So, if you like weight loss stuff, if you like resistance training and sports nutrition, I think you'll kind of like what I do.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. It's a wealth of information. Bill, you have a great rest of your Friday, and thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for the interview.
All right, hopefully you enjoyed that conversation that I had, and that we mentioned it in the podcast, but he has such a good channel over on Instagram using his educational background to provide really good information that busts myths on dieting and helps inform people on best practice. He's definitely worth a follow, and that is Bill Campbell PhD on Instagram, and you can also find links to papers we discussed and also how else to find information on Dr. Campbell over in the show notes for today's episode. Next week on the show, I am chatting to my mate Grant, who, if you may remember, was the very first interview I did for Mikkipedia. So Grant is a professor of public health in New Zealand, and he's most recently shared his views on COVID-19, on vaccine mandates, and just where he sees the state of things in New Zealand as it stands. And look, you might be suffering from COVID fatigue. I think we probably all are. But I do feel it's really important to continue to sort of maintain an interest or a presence in what's going on around us, because as soon as we check out, you just don't have the opportunity to really get more than just one perspective. And Grant brings another perspective to the conversation, and so I think that anyone out there with a curious mind is really going to enjoy that interview. Until then, though, team, you can find me over on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition, over on Instagram and Twitter at Mikki Williden, or over on my website, mikkiwilliden.com, where in addition to the recipe portal access, you're able to connect with me via an online meal plan for athletes, for some more food inspiration, fat loss plans, or book a consultation one-on-one with me. That is all over on mikkiwilliden.com. All right, guys, hope you have a great week. See you later. Bye-bye.